Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar, Mobile In-App Analytics, Why You Can't Afford to Overlook. My name is Shahab Chaudhry and I will be the moderator for today's event. I would like to thank everyone for attending today. Before we start, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. As we go through the slides and the panel discusses the various different aspects related to the topic today, please use the Q&A panel on the WebEx to ask questions. And I will make sure that I bring those up to the panel after the presentation. Also, the webinar is being recorded today, and we will be sending out a link to the slides and the recording at the end of the event. I'm also excited to share a special offer related to the topic towards the end of the presentation. So as we wrap up, I will be sharing with you the details of that offer as well. Before we get started, let me provide you with some background on Propelics. Propelics creates mobile strategies and world-class apps for the enterprise. We have extensive experience with working with clients around the globe. We are based in Silicon Valley in San Jose, California, and we have offices in Boston and Pittsburgh. The team at Propelics has been working together for over 15 years. And as way of our service offerings, I wanted to share with you the different types of services we provide to our clients. We have three different types of services that we primarily focus on. The first one being the mobile strategy services, which is where we have these services span business strategy, IT strategy, as an example, creating application roadmaps on the mobile side, as well as IT readiness roadmaps as you get ready for mobile. The other set of services that we focus on are mobile advisory services. These services provide mentoring for companies that are going down the path with mobile as they go down the mobile journey. We provide these types of mobile services to them. And mobile application development services, which take these strategies and deliver applications that help you execute on those strategies as you're putting them together. With that, let me introduce the panel. We're very excited to have with us today three panelists, and I will introduce them before we get into the presentation. Larry Lauvray. Larry is a co-founder and partner at Propelics. He has been involved in shaping mobile strategies and portfolios for several large companies and continues to be involved with them as a trusted advisor. We also have with us today Ashar Samdani from TkXel. Ashar has been involved in the development of mobile apps since the very early days of mobile. He has delivered mobile applications to various different startups as well as large companies. With us today on the panel also we have Kirk Schmink, who is with Keen IO, where he leads various different strategic and operational initiatives at the company. So once again, I want to thank the attendees for being part of the panel discussion today, as well as the panelists for sharing their insights. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists here, and we're going to start going through the presentation.
Super, thanks Shahab. So this is Larry Lauvray with Propelics. Welcome today. Today our theme is why you can't afford to overlook mobile analytics. Today's format will be a roundtable discussion on some of the key questions that we are often asked as mobile practitioners. We want to address the topic from a tool, technology, and a mobile strategy perspective. We received several questions during the sign-up process, so we'll be able to answer those in line with the discussions today. And as Shahab mentioned, you're also encouraged to ask questions in the Q&A box at the bottom right of your webinar. Just a side note, this meeting is being recorded and it will be made available to you, so you don't have to ask or request that as a separate line. Okay, so as we get started, we have an agenda laid out with some of the questions and just discussion points for today. So we'll start just top level, why you need mobile app analytics. Once we investigate that topic, we'll talk about how we get started, some of the different models. We'll talk about some of the analytics you should be thinking about and tracking. and we want to talk a little bit about the vendor landscape and who the players are today. We'll start to wrap up with the privacy implications, the personal identifiable information that we're tracking today in the mobile applications. And then we have a few use cases, a few stories to tell you towards the end. So we'll wrap up with a few of the use cases, and then we'll turn it back over to Shahab. So without further ado, let's see if I can do a change. So our first question is, why do you need mobile analytics? So there's some interesting statistics. Okay, sorry. So some really staggering statistics we have to share with you here. So in 2013, the number of new mobile apps will exceed the number of the desktop applications in the enterprise. So we see time and time again, Gartner, Forrester, a lot of the analysts, the trend toward mobile and even away from web and web apps. These, installed and mobile platforms are really taking over as far as the primary way to do business and engaging customers in different ways. That said, the customers are becoming more particular. So they're quick to download, they're also quick to delete. So if the app doesn't perform, and notably 74% of the download apps that are open, they're only open once. So 40% of those are deleted after the first use. Expectations are high. Consumerization has really set expectations high, both on the consumer apps and the enterprise apps. Patience is low, so you only get a couple of seconds after launch, and folks will delete the app, not use the app, and the main reason is app crashes. So that said, today, rather than launching an app and waiting for 1 or 2 stars of feedback on the various stores or the enterprise app store, internal stores, the MDM vendors, analytics has given us a view earlier, faster, in mobile time, where we can be proactive and understand that there's specific platforms, there's specific user cases, there's specific, whether it's an OS or a phone type. The post-launch is really where these apps are succeeding or failing, and analytics gives us a window to be proactive. So at the speed of mobile, we really need to think through the analytics, what we're measuring, how we're measuring. We want to understand the users, use cases, the demographics. We want to understand the sessions, how many sessions, how long are the sessions. We want to understand the mobile events. So what's occurring, what's being asked of the app, how's the app behaving. We want to understand the cross-platform. So if it's a cross-platform app, is it heavier used on maybe an Android or a Windows or an iOS, or which platform and which device in the platform, an iPad or an iPhone, is really the heavier use body for the mobile app itself. Then, of course, failures. So being able to have a breadcrumb trail leading up to the failure and then get a crash report back that's not just a dump of the internal app crash, but also leading up to and all around. So with that said, open up a little more, and I'm going to go to Ashar first. So from a why do we need these analytics, and what are we getting out of it? From a technology perspective, what are you seeing today, Ashar?
I think the analytics themselves, they help you measure your movement towards your end objectives or your business objectives or your goals that you define. So they're all about tracking whether you're accomplishing what you want your app to accomplish at the end of the way. So these analytics help us with that.
Excellent. So Kirk, from a platform, from a tool perspective, I know you're asked a lot as a vendor in a platform. So what are you seeing, and where's the market? What are we doing right now? Why do we need these analytics?
Yeah, I think it kind of falls along 2 lines in my mind. The first one tends to be around sort of marketing and messaging. Around the turn of the 20th century, John Wanamaker was a merchant in Philadelphia, and he coined the phrase, or the phrase is attributed to him, that half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. Trouble is, I don't know which half. And I think that the advances in technology around mobile and on the analytics side really give you an opportunity to find out very quickly which feature set within your application is being utilized by your customers, and then that gives you an opportunity to redeploy marketing spend and technical spend to really build out the complete feature set that your customers are demanding. The other side of that is a little bit on the technical side, is that the barriers to entry into this market are incredibly low. Whereas before, if we were developing enterprise software perhaps on the desktop side, companies could feel confident that being first to market gave them a little bit of protection because the development cycles were long, the cost of getting started were very high, and that is simply no longer the case with mobile. So we have to be able to adapt rapidly to exactly what the customers need, because if we can't provide it, surely someone else will jump in there and do it for us.
Yeah, excellent points. I think knowing, realizing that the demand is increasing, and the interest is increasing, as evidenced by some of the larger analyst firms are beginning to track closer now, not just analytics, but specifically the mobile analytics vendors. So that leads us to the next question. So knowing that there's a demand and an increase in interest, how do we get started with the in-app analytics? And we've kind of broken it down into three models, if you will. So there's the build your own. So this is breadcrumbs and typical BI and warehouse, and you're actually managing and monitoring your applications with a custom. There's out of the box. So there's package vendors that would actually do installs and APIs to call. And then there's the cloud services. So the cloud service APIs, probably some of the more common we're seeing today. So I'd like to get the perspective of the panel if we could. Kirk, I know there's a huge interest and a huge uptick in folks coming on board and trying to manage the data and everything. What are you seeing as far as the trend? Which one's kind of taking the lead here?
Yeah, it really kind of breaks along a couple of different lines depending on the objective of the customer. And when you're talking about getting started with analytics, that's absolutely where you need to start as a user side, is what are you really trying to accomplish? And the analytics should be in lockstep with the rest of your software development lifecycle, saying, well, what is it that I'm really trying to do here? And then think about the analytics questions that are going to answer that. With respect to the different ways that vendors participate in the community, it then falls along what you're trying to accomplish. So on the build side, if you have a solution, a mobile solution that's going to have extremely sensitive data, this is where we see a lot of play here. On the healthcare side, perhaps a little bit on the financial, depending on what the application does. These users are generally building their own solution because they want absolute control over the product. On the out-of-the-box side, it tends to follow along some of the simpler consumer apps that what the out-of-the-box solutions can provide are usually a generic and high-level reporting solution, downloads, opens, closes. There are specific providers for crashes. And although that's a really simplistic view, it can actually go a long way in thinking about how you want to continue to spend your dollars. And then that final, the cloud services, the API-driven side, this is where I think the bulk of the market falls. These are professional applications. They might be high-end consumer applications or gaming applications where the developer needs really rich and really deep insights into exactly what the customers are doing within the application, but they don't necessarily have the back-end skills to build out the solution. The skill and the talent and often the dollars required to build out their own reporting solution can be extremely expensive, and that's where these cloud providers can come in and abstract away some of the trouble and offer it up via API at a low cost and a pretty low barrier to entry.
Excellent. So Ashar, from a build versus buy, on the customization side, embedding the analytics in the apps themselves, what are some of the technical hurdles? What are some of the things you're running into here?
So from an implementation point of view, and if your business objectives allow, the cloud-based solution just wins without any further thought. I mean, building a custom analytics solution from the scratch could probably end up taking more time than building the app and building your original app. So without any thoughts, I think at the start, on the first level, you should always go ahead with the cloud-based solutions. There are a lot of third-party cloud-based solutions which pretty much serve 90% or more of your needs. And if there is certain type of executive level reporting that you even need on top of those numbers or on top of those analytics, they offer APIs on which your team can build up and create those executive level reports.
That's good. Kirk, I know I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the, how much data do we collect? Can we collect too much around that? So maybe we'll just jump into the next question. So this is a kind of what should we be tracking, and maybe some of the how much conversation too. I know we've, you know, internally within the strategy group, we've broken it down into 4 main areas, you know, really around the user experience analysis, you know, what the user's doing and how the user's doing, you know, time in app, if you would. The application behavior, so is the app performing, is it performant, you know, through the business processes, of which of the streams or the happy path flows are heaviest used. Just the application umbrella, so downloads, uses, opens, you know, how is the app being accepted and used, and then of course the crash detection and some of the root cause analysis. So, you know, when we think about areas that we really want to measure, you know, the user experience kind of pretty much makes it to the top. So, you know, within the app, we're able to understand the user perspective and track, you know, which screens. We're able to monitor response times with web services. We can put cookies and trackers, or trackers is a better word, a breadcrumb, in to see, you know, first event, call event, return event. And we want to understand if there's something that's holding up the user or maybe breaking the flow. Did the user complete their business process? And then just from an overall, you know, what's the heavier used components of the application itself? So getting the log, and we're going to get into some of the privacy pieces of here in a bit of what we do and don't want to track and should and shouldn't track. But, you know, understanding what the user's doing within the app, being able to do a histogram and show some of those trends is huge. The other piece of this is, number 2, the application behavior. So where the application, you know, by time, by geography, by platform, you know, is it an Android, is it iOS, some of the usage components, and then also by version. So within a platform, within an OS, you know, what versions do we see are the heaviest users, and understanding those with filters. So to be able to pare down and view into not only just the current state, it's important to understand that a lot of these analytics are near real time. So while the crash analytics would be returned to us after the app is opened again after a crash, the actual usage analytics are streamed live. So understanding what's going on at any given point in the day really can help not only the developers, but you can track against your business goals. So who's downloading the app? You know, is our usage increasing? What's the average overall profile? You know, the review session. So from a user and session perspective, we're seeing if it's downloaded, how many opens do we have? We can also see a trend of the session. So the session length increasing, decreasing. All those are telling as to, you know, some of the adoption and maybe even some of the demographics in some of the regions. So, you know, using those, we can proactively, and this is the key to the analytics, proactively address user adoption and improve it. The last piece is the crash detection and root cause. So understanding the number and types of crashes, that's first and foremost, but then adding filters to understand what time and platform and version and geography and all the pieces that helps us do the root cause and understand. And again, the crash reports are received, stored locally, and then sent once the application restarts. These are critical for enterprise applications because, you know, the more proactive and the more data you have to do a histogram and to do the root cause analysis on, the less, you know, help desk traffic, the less just user issues and noise you're going to have within the enterprise. Okay, with that, I'd like to kind of go back to Kirk real quick here, and just from a top level, you know, the user experience and the analysis, the behavioral analysis. What are you seeing as far as some of the requests and some of the activity today, Kirk?
Yeah, to start out with the question, like, what should you be tracking? It's both a philosophical and a practical question. On the philosophical side, my opinion and the opinion of Keen IO, and I think increasingly the opinion of the broader analytics community, is you should track everything. The practical answer to that question is, in my opinion, you should track everything that you've made clear to your users that you're going to track. And we'll touch a little bit more on the privacy issues a little bit later, and making sure that you're consistent with your own privacy policy. But if you can get your hands on the information about how they're moving through the application, you should grab it from day one. You want to start and approach this from taking a step back, thinking about analytics from the beginning, what is the progression that you want your users to take through the application, or what is your expected progression? And make sure that you can track all of that at an atomic level, and that will really help with both the user experience analysis as well as the application behavior analysis. Because if you understand that people are getting caught up on one particular area of the application or another, that certainly affects the user experience. Perhaps they can't find the way to get to the next step. Along the same lines as you can watch and see if there are different portions of the application that aren't performant, and that kind of gets to that application behavior analysis. But like I said, we like to recommend you track everything from the beginning, because the most interesting part about working with really any application, this is not specific to mobile, is that interesting things emerge that you had no idea were going to happen. And if you have access to that data early on, as you start to see those patterns emerge, you can very quickly start to track them and look back and see how they changed over time. A really rough example might be an e-commerce application where you want someone to open the application, put something in their cart, open the application, view something, put it in their cart, and check out. So that's a pretty easy funnel. But if you find that everybody's getting stuck on the view item, and that's where everyone is spending all of their time, it could be indicative that you actually have a fantastic browse solution, but a terrible, add to cart solution. And you should spend time thinking about that. How am I going to fix that to get people to the cart? But also, you may want to really spend time really working out that browse solution, because that could be the key feature that's driving folks to your application. And there could be lots of opportunities to make an even better application or to find revenue channels associated with the browse structure. So my short answer is track everything so long as you're not being inconsistent with your own privacy policies. And that's what we're seeing more and more in the community. As you think about the cost of everything that you do in building out a mobile application, the storage is the absolute cheapest. Your time, I promise you, is far more valuable than disk space. So don't worry about the disk space. Get a hold of it early.
Yep, that sounds good, and that's more and more what we're seeing. You can design and plan the analytics, and sometimes the golden nuggets are in the areas that you didn't even expect to see it in. So if you have it, and then you can go back and do your histograms, there's some real gold there. So it kind of begs the question, if we're going to track everything, maybe Ashar, you can help us with some of the performance concerns, because a lot of the conversation turns to track everything crash, everything whatever. Have you seen any performance? Is there any special tips and tricks around managing the applications from the install?
So from the performance perspective, no, I don't see any over the last a lot of apps that we've worked on and we've developed and we provide built-in analytics capturing mechanism in them. There's not really a lot of effect. The SDKs of major analytical libraries are pretty efficient in terms of capturing those events and then doing a certain batch processing whenever there is free processing room available. So that's really not a very big concern that you should be worried about. The important thing is that you make sure that you break your analytics into certain two bigger sections. One is relevant to your crash analytics or your crash reporting. The other is where you're collecting your actual data. So crash analytics, you have tools which will give you specific alerts. Let's say in a typical period of 1 hour, there are a lot of crashes in your app. You can get a certain alert, criticism being an example. On basis of what you should be tracking or what analytics should be there, I think try and think of numbers which are easily understandable and which are at the end of the day comparable. So you can come back on day 1 and day 10 and figure out this number actually rose or went down, and does this really number push me towards changing how my user experience behaves or how my app behaves. That analytic or that metric turns out to be a good number because it has pushed you to make a certain change in your app in terms of either user experience, in terms of either application behavior or application adoption, app adoption, or anything else. So that number is good.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think, probably second to what should I track, we hear is this going to hurt the performance of the application? And from the BI world, the last 18-something years, we've learned that it's important to be consistent with what you track. That way you can actually create a histogram. If you're always changing and messing around and doing new things, you're maybe taking away a data point that you were tracking, adding a different one, and it's difficult to build up your baseline.
That's correct.
So it's that's a really good point, I think. So okay, so key areas of measurement around everything from the user all the way through the crash of the application. That leads us a little bit into the vendors and who's doing what and how we're able to engage some of the strengths and weaknesses. Kirk, this is right up your alley. Maybe you can just take us into a bit of a narrative here as to what the vendors are doing and some of the strengths and weaknesses.
Absolutely, and my breakdown here kind of falls along the same lines that we discussed earlier on sort of build versus out of the box versus a cloud solution. So on the build your own side, and this is where companies like Google and Facebook and Yahoo have really led the charge, not surprisingly because they are extraordinarily strong technical organizations and they have lots of technical talent. And the technologies that you've seen that support the build your own solution, Hadoop and Cassandra and Kafka, have all come out of these sorts of organizations. So, but even more, now that they've been open sourced and made available, other enterprises are taking advantage of that build your own solution. Again, the costs are high. You're talking about managing your own servers. You're talking about cultivating very specific technical talent around this, but there's still plenty of folks that are doing that. On the out-of-the-box side, there's a lot of different vendors, and more coming up every day. Probably the most prominent on the mobile side is Flurry, and what they do is they offer an SDK across mobile devices that you can just drop in, and it'll track pretty high-level metrics across your users. There's some customization that you can do there, but it's relatively limited. It's a free product, and the way that they monetize is they're going to package up the information that they get out of your application, and then they resell it to advertisers. And then moving along, there are a lot of niche players. If you're looking at crash reporting, if you're looking at gaming, or you're looking at e-commerce. Criticism is on the crash side. Contagion plays in the gaming side a little bit here on the out-of-the-box solution. They kind of lead into the cloud services. So again, it really depends what you want to accomplish there. Sort of the area where I have a dog in the fight is on the cloud services side, and there are a handful of companies that have taken the approach that they want to approximate the build your own solution, but without any of the trouble of having to build it. So Keen IO is my company, and this is what we do. There's a company out of Boulder called Precog. They do something very similar. Contagion plays here as well a little bit, but the idea is that you as a business operator or as a developer know the things that are relevant to your application, and that we as a provider are not going to be good at getting deep at them. So what we do is we provide via API, we abstract away all of the things about storage and scaling and performance that you would normally have to manage on a build your own solution, and say, here's a set of APIs that let you answer business questions. So the analog that I like to look at is, just as AWS came in and said, you don't have to know every single thing about the technical infrastructure of a data center to get the benefit of a data center, we do the same thing with analytics. Both of us have just abstracted away some of the challenges and offered up APIs to solve these things. And I would say the market at the moment is there's still a lot of the out-of-the-box solutions because a lot of them tend to be very drop-in. They don't require a whole lot of customization. Along the same lines, they're limiting because you can't get as much out of it without getting custom to really dig into your applications. The larger organizations with a lot of technical experience are building their own, and more the cloud services are becoming popular, more, and even in the enterprise, because we're seeing a trend that has been happening for a long time, and I think it's starting to accelerate, where the enterprise has gotten far more comfortable with cloud solutions, whereas 4 or 5 years ago, it would be an anathema to think about taking your enterprise data and putting it up in a cloud solution. Folks like AWS have helped a lot with that as well and said, no, look, it's really okay. We're a legitimate provider, and you're starting to see a transition over to that.
That's good. And one of the questions we get asked a good bit, Kirk, is, are we seeing the web analytics? So, for years and years, there's the web analytics players and actually, embedded and, page views and those types of things. Excuse me. Are those folks trying to make a transition over and, embedded analytics in the mobile apps, or are they able to? What are you seeing around some of the current web players?
Absolutely. Google Analytics is obviously probably the biggest player here, at least the most well-known. And even on the mobile side, Flurry has continued to stay ahead of them. And the real trouble with taking a web analytics solution and applying it to the mobile analytics solution, and there are plenty of people that are trying, is that the notion of a web analytics solution, particularly Google Analytics, was developed a number of years ago, and it's organized around this notion of a page view, and that the way that we will interact with the internet is by looking at a static page, and then looking at another static page, and then looking at another static page. and we're going to capture some information about those different static pages and provide that back to you. On the mobile side, that's simply not how we interact with our mobile devices, and more on the web it's no longer true. Is you may interact with a single page that has lots of functionality and lots of features, but you never leave that page. So what we see is the web to mobile solutions that are out there, rather than rethinking the paradigm, have tried to just apply that notion, and it'll get you some of the way. I would argue it gets you very little of the way, but there's still a lot of people using that primarily because it's a free solution that they're comfortable with, but it really doesn't stand up to the needs of the modern mobile application or even the modern website. It just is so much more complex than it was a number of years ago when some of these tools were initially developed.
That makes sense, I guess. I guess from a technical perspective, I'm interested in, Ashar, your perspective on specialized vendors and, the differences of their approaches and how they're embedding and, what's some of the challenges and risks we're seeing across the technology space right now?
So there are a few companies and there are a few providers which are specialized for your specific domain. So for instance, Ashar was very much into social games and how engagement is going on in the app, because in the social game, engagement is what all matters. The more the user is engaged, the more the opportunity is for them to sell something and to make them keep on playing the game. So Ashar initially targeted at that particular landscape. Larry was more of an open landscape that you could just record everything, and they left up to the user to figure out how to do the reporting. So what I'm seeing is that depending on business goals or on the business objectives, what companies do is they figure out which particular provider, cloud-based provider is right now fitting their entire need, and if it takes, they integrate two different systems altogether. So they might integrate Flurry for certain analytics and might integrate Ashar for certain analytics. Again, on the fact that it really doesn't take a lot of time in integration. So what time does it take? It takes time to think about what analytics you have to capture, but from the technical perspective, actually capturing the analytics, that's pretty easy to translate from a requirement to a technical perspective and doesn't really hurt your performance a lot in the long run. So that's good about it.
So from a cloud to build your own, are there ever concerns that, just the sheer size, does it bloat the app, from an installation, from a, overall app size? Because, we are dealing with mobile apps and wireless, downloads and things. Anything there?
No. So previously over the last 3-4 years, these companies themselves have evolved. So for instance, Larry in the very beginning was, if I remember correctly, somewhere around 100. They've reduced the size for their SDK from almost 50 to 60%, which just pretty much brings it to a minimal amount. But yes, at times in Android application, for instance, the libraries themselves, they at times are pretty much, if you start integrating 3 or 4, it can cost you up to half a meg of space or up to a meg even. So depending on the platform, for the iOS, they're pretty good, they're pretty solid, very small, sizes of the SDKs. For Android at times, yes, they slightly bloat up your app.
That's becoming a theme, I think. Across every planning, every strategy, you have to really account for which devices and which OSs you're going to support. So,
exactly.
So thinking that through. So that's good. From a privacy perspective, we'll jump straight into. We've collected this. There's some performance issues, but not really. It's negligible. Is kind of what we're saying, what we're hearing. But the privacy, we've seen, I guess, over the last year or so, a big uptick in folks that are in government policies and lawsuits, if you will, around the privacy, PII, the personally identifiable information, and the privacy policies being accepted when the app is downloaded and also when the app starts, being involved with the app. I guess California is one of the more strict enforcers of some of this, and they went after Delta not too long ago. So, it kind of raised everyone's awareness again and kind of, we'll say, rekindled the fire to make sure that everyone's covered on the policy and the privacy policies. From what the landscape is doing, and the vendors, the analytics vendors are very cognizant about, not capturing the personal information. A lot of the information is aggregated, So, you know, what we're seeing, I guess, from a overall strategy is there's the ability to capture, you know, custom metadata, the name, the event, the geography, all these things. You can custom, you know, build custom metadata to pull that in with your analytic, but typically the out of the box is more measuring what the application is doing and not necessarily capturing the personal details. Kirk, I like your perspective on this. What are you seeing as far as trends towards, you know, capturing, or I guess capturing the right information rather than the PII information?
Yeah, I think a lot of the out-of-the-box providers have done a really good job with this, simply because it's harder to customize their stuff and that they're billing themselves as a sort of, I'm going to call it a point-and-click solution, so that they've pretty much taken away all of that PII stuff. It's not super interesting at an atomic level that Sally did this. You'd much rather know that a female with this, in this age range and this geography did this. The thing that does complicate even some of those out-of-the-box solutions is geolocation. That has been, in many cases, considered to be personally identifiable, even though it's not necessarily associated with a name or an address or something like that, just having latitude and longitude. So that's something you've got to watch out for. In general, what I've seen, the way that Keen IO approaches this problem is in our terms of service and our privacy policy, we make it clear that there are a handful of types of information that you should never send us, that we do not want to see in our system. We don't want to see anything personally identifiable for an individual under the age of 13, so that we are COPPA compliant, and as well as our customers should be COPPA compliant. That's the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And the same sort of thing applies to health information that's personally identifiable, to financial information. And where this starts to get a little bit muddy is because a lot of the cloud solutions like Keen IO and as well as the build your own give you the opportunity to collect all this information, you need to develop sort of on the internal side some rigorous protection mechanisms for your organization to make sure that it's not happening. And again, the most important thing, and Larry hit on this earlier, is you need to be clear in your privacy policy to your customers, or in your terms of service to your customers, what you're going to track, what you're going to do with it, when you're going to get rid of it. Because as Larry noted, that the government's starting to come in and be more involved in this space. The FCC, for example, I know has recently been working on, and they may have actually completed what their recommendations are about retaining personally identifiable information. And I think it's measured in months, with the discussion that I heard. So you just got to watch out for that and make sure you're communicating to your customers what's correct. The other consideration is going to be on the geography in which you operate. The United States has a certain set of rules. Europe has a certain set of rules. Japan has a certain set of rules. So depending on where you're going to advertise and try and market your application, you may need to be aware of location-specific requirements. For example, Europe is far more strict about the stuff that you can collect and retain. But I think that what we'll see is some of those stricter policies moving across the Atlantic into our market. Sort of the rule of thumb here, as far as I can tell, is be transparent with your customers and then be consistent with the things that you say to your customers. That's the most important part here.
That's good. I saw something interesting come through the other day. There's a new dimension of, you know, what we can and track, and a different set of rules for age-based. So I think it was 13 years old and younger, and there's a more stringent. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that falls under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA. And essentially they say that you should not be tracking anything that's personally identifiable for any reason, as I understand it. I'm not an attorney, so don't quote me on this. Whereas with other personally identifiable information, if you're an adult or in a higher age range, you can collect that stuff. You should purge it at some point. You can make use of it for application improvement. But for children under the age of 13, you can never track any of that stuff. And it's become problematic for some of the gaming companies who want to target, let's call it teenagers, but their application is being picked up by younger users, where they can really get in there and start to collect information, because they don't actually know who's going to have their hands on the application. So, you know, you have to think about who you're going to be marketing to. That's sort of the big indicator on that. But certainly under the age of 13 is a hot button topic right now. And I know that agencies have been paying a lot of attention to this particular area.
Yeah, I guess it's something to watch out for. It doesn't necessarily land in the lap of our enterprise users and the use cases we run into a lot. You know, even though you know, some of the applications that we'll run into involve HR type, benefit type activities, and you know, of the working adult, there's children involved as far as part of the benefits. But to your point, I guess, it's not a 13-year-old actually on an enterprise app usually, so it's probably not a larger concern for the enterprise folks. Ashar, from a technical perspective, anything you're seeing as far as the PII and having to avoid that, and coaching the developers, if you will, to make sure that we don't accidentally track or capture metadata that would matter?
Yeah, so for the purpose of crafting analytics or crashes even, we absolutely don't need anything in terms of PII. All we're concerned with is the device, the OS version, the device in itself. So, teams that we work with, TkXel itself, we don't capture that. We have very strict rules in terms of making sure that no personal identifiable information is captured in there, and take it very seriously.
I guess it's a win-win. I mean, the tech team doesn't care. There's nothing in there that's useful. The government doesn't want us to, and the folks are not, are interested in us not tracking it. So it seems like a win-win if everyone kind of plays nice here. So.
So Apple had to change their own policy of UDIDs and all that stuff, policy stuff. So it's just good.
Well, the industry's growing fast. I mean, very, very fluid, very adaptive. So it's so we put our heads together. We came up with a couple of examples. I don't know if I call all of them innovative, but there's a few stories we have, I guess, of analytics involved in assisting with user adoption or playing a large part in how the application is managed. So I can start with this one. So from an innovation perspective, this was a global app rolled out. It was cross-platform, so it was installed on iOS and Android. It was global. It did have regionalization, so it managed the language dynamically through the content management system. But once rolled out, within the first weeks, a very short timeline for feedback, realized that there were pockets of issues, device-specific issues. Some of the analytics were coming back and reporting, just a couple of the carriers, and there seemed to be a time of day trending, when some of these issues were occurring. So, what the team did, they dug through the analytics and tried to get to the nuts and bolts of, which region and why it was happening for specifically a UK region, and it was a pocket of failures within a specific OS. So it wasn't across the entire, and it was an Android focus. It wasn't an entire Android issue. It seemed to be an issue just on specific either devices or specific version of the OS. So when we started digging into it, it turns out that there was a method used that was supported in the newer operating systems of Android, but not in the older. So folks that had that specific carrier in that specific region using that specific OS version, it turns out it was a kind of a hidden issue, if you will, that would have showed up in an app store as random 5-star, 1-star, 5-star, 1-star, kind of bipolar responses. But using the analytics, they were able to dig in. The tech team was able to dig in, and not only did they identify what it was and what Android OS it was, but they were able to actually modify the app, redeploy it, and it was, again, weeks, not months of response time here. And the user acceptance, once it was patched and reinstalled, it was fairly easy to see that the user acceptance and adoption started trending back up again. So, that's a very good example of moving in mobile time, not waiting for feedback and not having to take trouble help desk type issues, understanding what was going on. And it was just such a nuance, such a specific pocket, it would have been very difficult to track down over phone calls and help desk tickets. So that was one that, kind of helped the enterprise along. It was an internal enterprise app, by the way. So Kirk, maybe you can talk a little bit about this one. I think you wrote this one up.
Yeah, the approach that I take with the virtue of analytics is actually I like to take a step a little bit back and think about what we're really talking about here is data science. How can you find patterns and make use of the information that's coming available through your application to drive engagement, to make the user application better, or any of those things? And my favorite example about data science at work where you had an organization that was extremely committed to being analytical and implementing lots of solutions is LinkedIn. And when LinkedIn came out a number of years ago, they had this problem where they could get people to sign up, but they couldn't get them to do anything else. So they were trying to look for ways, how do you drive engagement on this fledgling network? It was obviously different than Facebook because you're talking about a professional community. So what they did is as they were looking through the user experience across their application, they found that there was a high correlation between clicking on and viewing a personal email and then looking out through their network. And that was where they were getting some of the engagement. So what they did is they built a feature set on top of that, and it's one that I imagine we all know if you're a LinkedIn user. It's people you know. It's up in the top right-hand corner, and what that's coming from is they look at the people that you're viewing and who their connections are and what the strongest correlation is, and then they surface those people to you to try and get you to engage deeper within the application and build out your network, thereby adding value to the LinkedIn network. And I don't know if anyone of you is like me, but I probably lose 15 minutes a day to this particular feature because I find it's usually spot on. And it's made me think differently about this application. And although it's web, it's not quite mobile, I actually tend to not think about that division all that much because I think that in the future these things are going to come together. There's going to be, an online solution, and the point of access is going to be less interesting. But my point here is that as you get to know what your users are doing within your application, there can be lots of opportunities that you had not originally anticipated to drive higher levels of engagement. And that's why I like this example so much.
That's a great example. The interesting thing here is it's an automated and totally accurate response. So, it's not biased by someone's opinion or anything. You're actually able to make analytical decisions based on the data and where the traffic is. So that's huge in a world of trying to make sure adoption is high and acceptance. It's a usable app, so that's good. So what I'd like to kind of wrap up with here, and we're getting close. I want to be able to open up for some of the questions also. Shahab, I think you've been tracking the inbounds. So one last consideration. So we've talked about who, how, when. I want to talk about planning analytics and measures during the design of your application. So when you're thinking about it's this screen, it's that screen, it's a swipe, it's a, however you're thinking about the user engagement and the behaviors, think through the actions you're expecting them to take, plan to measure, plan against goals, and do it day one. So when you deploy the app, once it's out and you start getting feedback and then you realize, we should probably go back and put some analytics in so we can see what's actually going on, it's too late. We've already had your 2 seconds. They've already installed the app and deleted it, and they're probably not going to come back. So use your, first time to make a good impression. Use that philosophy and make sure you put your analytics in for your first go. Even when you're doing pilots, the amount of information that comes back even out of a pilot group can be phenomenally valuable for thinking out your larger roadmap. Okay, so how do we get there? Some of the most common ways, what Propelics brings to the table is some of the benchmarking. So understanding the business drivers, understanding the different scenarios that we're going to address, taking those scenarios and actually building out the full application roadmap. So the application roadmap could be an app, it could be 3 scenarios solved by an app, it could be an app and vice versa. Understanding what that actually is and where your value lies, your business drivers, and then taking that app to the next level. So once you understand this app will and will not do these things to solve my business goals, take that and really get into the true design, the user experience, the visualization, the mock-ups. Make sure you're really understanding how the users understand the app and how they're using the app. Plan your analytics behind that, then start your SDLC, then start your actual technical components. There's a lot of planning, analysis planning in this world. It buys you a lot, and it doesn't take a long time. So in the old world where, it was several months to do a design of an ERP or a monster, monolithic system, embedded system, it's days and weeks in the mobile world. So, understand it's not a big investment, but there's huge value to spend a little time and think that through, especially from the visualization. A lot of what we do at these apps scoping and planning workshops, these are a week or 2 to kind of get a broad spectrum of here's the applications and tie it down to here's the winning app, if you will, the best candidate for the business goals, and being able to deliver that in the right time and space. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Shahab. I think he has a quick rundown for us here on some of the Kickstarts and some of the ways to engage.
Yes, thank you, Larry, Ashar, and Kirk, for sharing your insights. There's been a lot of questions that have been coming in, but before I switch over to the questions, I wanted to thank the attendees for all the participation, as well as I wanted to share that there's still some time left. If we have additional questions, we will be hopefully able to address all of those. Before I get to the questions, I want to also share with you the special offer that I introduced at the beginning of the presentation. We're offering a free 1-hour mobile advisory call with one of our mobile strategists here at Propelics, and if you are interested in that, you can send an email at the email address shown here, or you can give us a call to avail that offer. And as Larry pointed out, a lot of our services are packaged into these Kickstarts, which address various different aspects of your mobile strategy and mobile application development initiatives. And so we're happy to talk to you about that in more detail, specific to your specific needs. So with that, let me switch over to the Q&A part of this. The first question comes from John, and it is about, I know the panel talked a little bit about considerations in terms of what you can and cannot track from a privacy perspective. How about the crash reports that are sent from some of these analytical tools? Are those sent with the user having prior knowledge, or is there, does the user have an opportunity to be able to decide if they want to share those crash reports or not? And I'll turn it over to the panel to respond to that.
Yeah, I can speak on some of the platforms. So there is actually and you'll see this in some of the applications. It'll actually pop up a window and say, crash detected, send report, and it'll let you, proactively select yes or no at that event. So that's how some of the vendors are handling it. Those are the ones I've seen. Ashar, have you seen others?
Yeah, that's correct. There are both ways of doing it. There's a very nice way of asking for feedback and telling them just like how your typical Windows or Apple machines are, that once they find a crash, they ask you to submit a feedback or give a report so that it helps the guys back to improve the product. So yeah, that's one way of typically most of the libraries or SDKs, they ask you this.
Okay. And of course, when we're setting up the crash reports, we're specifically not capturing the PII. Yeah. So it is truly a crash log that we're sending with the amount of breadcrumbs of pre-event, post-event type activities. So this is not the PII stuff at all. Thank you.
Great. The second question is related to the types of skill sets and resources needed to be added to your application development teams. Are there specific skill sets that need to be added beyond the typical mobile application development skill sets?
Okay.
So yeah, on the analysis part, so what is important is that once you start collecting your analytics, you don't forget about them. I mean, they shouldn't be lying in your tool and you're just not looking at them. You need people who understand your product, who understand your business goals, to make sense of those numbers. And it really depends on what kind of domain you're participating in. So for instance, if you're measuring a certain business objective that you need to meet, you need to bring in your BI guys in to make sense of those numbers, whether we are actually meeting that objective, we're meeting that goal or not. If it's a game that you're working on, you need monetization people guys in so that they make sense of the numbers, whether these numbers are helping them towards making more revenues, making more making more bucks or not. So it really depends on what your business objective and goal is, and you bring in people relevant to that certain area, and they start making sense of those numbers. Plus, you also create a certain executive summaries for the executives as well.
So maybe Kirk, from a platform and an offering perspective, what's your perspective on the skills that's needed, especially maybe on the platform cloud stuff?
Yeah, on the platform cloud stuff, a lot of the providers, what we have really tried to do here is say that all the developers are capable of instrumenting and running analysis against your analytics solution without a lot of new skills. Ashar's absolutely right that bringing in the appropriate resources elsewhere in the organization to know what those questions are is essential. But the cloud solutions, we tried extremely hard to abstract away all of the new technology challenges and say, all right, here's an API. You use APIs every day for everything else. You might use some JSON to return the information, but in theory, you don't need any new skills. If you're looking at those build your own solutions, that's a completely different ballgame. Those are usually very specific skill sets and highly technical people. And in that case, you may need to bring in a Hadoop expert or a Cassandra expert or a distributed systems expert if you don't already have one. But on the cloud side and the out of the box, in general, no, you don't need a lot of new technical talent. But again, knowing the right questions to ask, depending on where that falls in the organization, you may need to loop in someone else.
Cool.
Okay, great. We have another question from David that is related to embarking on including analytics in your mobile applications. And as you start that adoption journey, are there ways that some of these products can be integrated into a trial or a pilot? And also, what kind of opportunity do you have to be able to exit out of that as you conclude the trial and you're not ready to get proceed forward? Any insights on how these are licensed as well as around solution pricing? What should folks be budgeting on top of the mobile application for some of these products?
That's good. I can give a perspective on some of the, especially across some of the cross-platform tools. Kirk, you want to take that one first as far as the trial and exiting?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of the companies out there are offering trials, and the way that you could exit that trial is as your time period expires, they're just going to stop collecting the data. So you may not need to do anything specific with your application once that's over. And then on the pricing side, in general, everybody has a trial or developer package that's either free or low cost to get started. These are mostly tools that are built by developers for developers with the understanding that nobody wants to make a commitment to something if they don't have a good feeling that it's going to work for them. And then depending on how you've instrumented your application, there's usually pretty easy ways to turn these solutions on and off, oftentimes without having to redeploy the application at all. Yes, depending on what tool you go with, almost universally there's a way to do that. Very few people are going to charge you tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the box without any clear demonstration of value. It just, the structures are a little variable across the platforms.
And some of the initial, to get your feet wet, basically, a lot of the testing and trials are free. So, even the platform, the lower cost or the less deep platforms, just to get a flavor of what the analytics can do and kind of test it out in your application, the entry-level capabilities are free. And what we've seen on some of the cross-platform tools is they'll embed the crash with the user analytics and maybe even bundle in some testing, extend it out to a SOSTA or some, sort of automated testing, bundle that together, and they'll run that in, month-type windows and maybe strike a deal, based on the platform license level you have, strike a deal for some testing and some pre-work on some of that too.
Okay, great. We're coming to the end of our scheduled hour here. I know there's questions still coming up, so we haven't been able to get to your questions. Please, reach out to us. Likewise, as I mentioned earlier, the slides will be sent out in a link as well as the recording of this webinar. With that, I'd like to thank the panel, Larry, Ashar, Kirk. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'd like to thank all of the attendees today for joining us for the webinar, and I hope you will take you'll benefit from the content and you'll avail the offer of the mobile advisory session. With that, it concludes our webinar for today. Thank you.